You're alone, but the silence feels loud. Your mind won't sit still. You reach for people, conversations, distractions, thinking they'll fill the space you can't bear. Buddhism doesn't soften this truth. Your emptiness isn't coming from being alone. It's coming from not knowing yourself. If you understood your own mind even a little, solitude would stop feeling like a punishment and start feeling like freedom. This is the shift you've been running from. Let's begin. 1. The illusion of emptiness. People think emptiness comes from being alone, but that's one of the biggest misunderstandings in life. You can sit in a crowded room, surrounded by voices and faces, and still feel completely hollow inside. You can be in a relationship, in a family, in a community, and still feel disconnected, unseen, and untouched. And you can sit by yourself in a quiet room and feel more whole than you've ever felt with anyone. This alone proves something important. The emptiness you feel has nothing to do with the number of people around you. It comes from something far deeper, something most people never examine because it's uncomfortable. Emptiness is a lack of connection with your own inner world. When you're constantly surrounded by noise, conversations, entertainment, social media, responsibilities, distractions, you don't have to face yourself. The noise keeps everything buried. But the moment you're alone, the moment the distractions fade, the mind brings all that unresolved material back to the surface. Thoughts you pushed away, feelings you didn't want to deal with, fears you pretended weren't there. The silence doesn't create your loneliness, it exposes it. And because you're not used to seeing yourself without filters, you call that uncomfortable exposure emptiness. Buddhism calls this illusion shunyata, misunderstood emptiness, wrongly interpreted as a void, a deficiency, something missing. But in reality, the mind is simply reacting to the absence of constant stimulation. Your mind is addicted to activity the same way a thirsty man is addicted to water. Take away the noise, and the withdrawal symptoms show up. Restlessness, anxiety, boredom, a vague sense that something is wrong, a sudden pull to reach for your phone, check messages, call someone, turn on music, open a browser, anything to fill the space. This is not emptiness. This is addiction. The problem is not the quiet. The problem is that you've never learned how to rest your mind without leaning on something external. You don't know what to do with yourself when you're not being entertained. You don't know how to sit with your thoughts without drowning in them. You don't know how to breathe in the silence without panicking. This is why loneliness feels like a threat, because being alone forces you to see the truth you keep avoiding. In solitude, the masks fall off, the roles disappear, the audience vanishes. There's no one left to impress, no one left to distract, no one left to blame. It's just you and your mind. Most people have never actually met their own mind. They've only met the noise around it. When you think you're lonely, what's actually happening is that you're encountering parts of yourself you don't understand. The fear you feel isn't fear of being alone, it's fear of meeting your own unresolved emotions. The sadness you feel isn't caused by solitude, it's caused by the wounds that finally have space to speak. The discomfort that rises in silence is simply your inner world asking for attention after being ignored for years. Buddhism doesn't tell you to suppress this. It doesn't tell you to escape it. It tells you to see it clearly. Because once you understand what's actually happening, the illusion of emptiness begins to dissolve. You start realizing that nothing is missing. You are not broken. You are not incomplete. You are simply unfamiliar with your own internal landscape. When you stop fighting the silence, you start discovering something surprising. There is depth inside you. There is clarity, strength, peace, and wisdom that you've never accessed because you were always too distracted to notice it. But you cannot reach this deeper layer without first passing through the discomfort. The initial silence feels sharp, unsettling, even painful, because it removes the shield of noise that protected you from your own truth. Think of it like stepping into a dark room. At first you can't see anything, and your mind imagines dangers. You want to run. But if you stay still long enough, your eyes adjust, the shapes emerge, the room becomes familiar. And eventually, you wonder why you were afraid in the first place. Solitude works the same way. At first, your mind will project fears onto the silence. You'll feel like something is wrong, like something is missing, like you're incomplete. But the longer you stay, the more you begin to see what's actually there. Your thoughts become clearer, your emotions become more honest, your attention becomes sharper, and slowly the fear fades. You begin to rest within yourself. And when that happens, everything changes. Most people never reach this point because they escape the silence the moment it becomes uncomfortable. They run back into noise, back into people, back into distractions, believing these things will save them from their loneliness. But the truth is brutally simple. No one can save you from loneliness except you. Not because other people are unimportant, but because no one can fill the space you're afraid to fill yourself. If you don't have a relationship with your own mind, no relationship with another person will ever feel stable. If you cannot sit with yourself, you will always chase people to escape yourself. And if you depend on others to feel whole, you will always feel fragile. Solitude isn't the enemy. Ignorance of your own mind is. Once you understand this, the illusion of emptiness loses its power. Silence stops being something you fear and becomes something you welcome. You stop viewing alone time as a burden and start seeing it as a doorway. You realize that the quiet is not empty, it's full of space for healing, full of clarity, full of awareness, full of the parts of yourself you forgot existed because life was too loud for you to hear them. This is why Buddhism teaches that the mind creates its own suffering, not because life is always painful, but because we misinterpret our own experiences. We think solitude is lack. We think silence is emptiness. We think discomfort is danger. But these are just misunderstandings. You don't need more people. You need more awareness. You need to understand the difference between real emptiness and the illusion your mind creates when it encounters silence. When you stop fighting that silence and start exploring it, your relationship with yourself transforms. And the moment you become comfortable in your own presence, the idea of needing anyone to escape loneliness simply dissolves. You don't become isolated, you become whole. 2. Why you fear your own presence. People assume they fear being alone. That's not true. What you actually fear is meeting yourself without any buffers, distractions, or roles to hide behind. The moment the world around you goes quiet, your mind turns its attention inward, and suddenly you're face to face with thoughts, memories, insecurities, and questions you've avoided for years. That confrontation is what scares you, not solitude itself. Most people spend their entire lives running from themselves without realizing it. They fill every gap in their day with noise. They scroll through their phones the moment boredom appears. They call someone whenever the silence becomes too heavy. They turn on music, videos, or conversations just to avoid hearing their own mind. They mistake this constant stimulation for a normal life, but it's not normal, it's dependence. Buddhism explains this in a simple, brutally honest way. You fear your own presence because you have never trained your mind to be a friend. You've treated it like a stranger, sometimes even an enemy. When the mind is left alone, it brings up everything unresolved. So of course you run, but running only makes the inner world scarier. Ignoring yourself doesn't make the fear disappear, it makes it stronger. The real root of your fear lies in this. You do not know who you are without the world's noise around you. You don't know who you are without someone validating you, distracting you, or defining you. Your identity has been shaped by external attention for so long that sitting with yourself feels like sitting with a stranger. And the truth is, a stranger with your memories, your pain, and your unexamined thoughts can feel intimidating. When you're alone, you're stripped of everything superficial. There's no one to impress, no one to fix, no one to perform for, no one to reassure you, no one to distract you from your own doubts and desires. In that raw state, you see yourself clearly, maybe for the first time, and clarity is uncomfortable when you've been avoiding it. You see how anxious your mind truly is beneath the surface. You see how restless you've become from overstimulation. You see how insecure you feel without external approval. You see how much of your life was shaped by fear, not choice. You see how empty your thoughts become when the noise stops. This is the confrontation most people avoid, and they call it loneliness. Buddhism calls it ignorance, the refusal to understand your own mind. But here's the truth you need to accept if you want to grow. You cannot be free until you face yourself. When monks train in solitude, they aren't trying to escape the world. They're learning to stop escaping themselves. And when the mind finally stops running, something powerful happens. The fear doesn't grow, it dissolves. Because the fear was never about being alone, it was about misunderstanding your own thoughts. The mind is like a room you've kept locked for years. You assume it's dark, dusty, dangerous, full of things you don't want to see. But when you finally open the door and step inside, you realize it's just a room that needs light and attention. Your inner world is not as terrifying as you imagine. It only feels that way because you've neglected it. When you're constantly around people, you don't notice how dependent you've become on them to regulate your emotions. You rely on them to distract you, to reassure you, to confirm your worth. But dependence always breeds fear. The fear of losing them, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of being left behind, the fear of silence returning. The moment you're alone, those fears surface. They're not created by solitude, they're revealed by it. You fear your own presence because being with yourself forces you to face all the ways you've abandoned yourself. It forces you to see the habits you use to hide from your emotional wounds. It forces you to acknowledge that much of your suffering has nothing to do with your circumstances and everything to do with how you relate to your own mind. Buddhism teaches that clinging and aversion are the roots of fear. When you cling to distractions, you fear their absence. When you avoid silence, silence becomes threatening. This is why solitude feels heavy, because you're experiencing the weight of your own aversion. But here's the transformation waiting behind that fear. If you stay with yourself long enough, without reaching for a distraction the moment discomfort shows up, your mind begins to settle. You notice something shift. The restlessness fades. The panic softens. The thoughts slow down. The silence becomes less hostile. You stop feeling like you need to escape the moment. You begin to realize that your own presence isn't dangerous, it's unfamiliar, and anything unfamiliar feels threatening at first. When you allow yourself to stay with your thoughts without reacting, judging, or running, you start forming a relationship with your inner world. You begin to understand your patterns. You start seeing your mind's games. You notice how fear exaggerates things. You see how many of your anxieties are nothing more than old habits repeating themselves. Slowly, your inner presence becomes less of a stranger and more of a companion. You begin to trust your own company. You stop treating solitude like a punishment. And the fear that once controlled you begins to fade, not because you forced it away, but because you stopped feeding it. The moment you learn to sit with yourself without fear is the moment you take back your freedom. You are no longer a slave to noise or dependent on others for emotional stability. You don't search for people to fill the silence because the silence itself becomes stable. You don't panic when left alone because you understand that being alone is simply being with yourself, and that's no longer threatening. You learn that your presence can be a refuge instead of a danger. You learn that you can comfort yourself, guide yourself, and observe yourself without collapsing. You learn that solitude is not emptiness, it's connection. Connection with the one person who has been with you your entire life, yet remained ignored, your own mind. And once you stop fearing your own presence, you stop fearing solitude altogether. You stop needing others to distract you from yourself. You stop searching for people to rescue you from inner discomfort. The fear dissolves because you finally see the truth. You were never afraid of being alone. You were only afraid of meeting yourself. When you overcome that fear, your relationship with yourself transforms from avoidance to understanding. And once you understand yourself, you stop needing the world to make you feel whole. 3. The nature of true companionship. People romanticize companionship, but most of what they call connection is just mutual distraction. Two people running from their own emptiness, using each other as noise so they don't have to face themselves. That's not companionship. That's dependence, dressed up as love. Buddhism strips away the illusion and forces you to see the truth. If your happiness collapses the moment someone leaves, you weren't in a relationship, you were clinging to a lifeline. A person who cannot sit peacefully with themselves will always enter relationships for the wrong reasons. They look for comfort instead of clarity, distraction instead of growth, validation instead of understanding. This creates shallow bonds that crumble as soon as life becomes uncomfortable. True companionship begins only when you learn to be whole within yourself. Otherwise, you're not sharing your life, you're asking someone else to complete it. Most people don't want partners, they want emotional crutches. They want someone to silence their thoughts, erase their boredom, and patch their insecurities. They want someone to fill the silence they're terrified of. But when you approach a relationship from fear or emptiness, you end up suffocating the other person with expectations. You cling, you demand, you panic at distance, you overthink every minor change in tone or behavior. You treat connection like a fragile possession that could slip away at any moment. And what happens? The very attachment meant to save you becomes the source of your suffering. The more you cling, the more the relationship collapses. The more you demand reassurance, the more you undermine the bond. The more you rely on someone to fill your inner void, the more that void grows. Buddhism explains this with brutal clarity. Craving leads to suffering. When you crave companionship because you dread your own company, the relationship is already poisoned. You're not meeting the other person, you're meeting your own fear through them. You're using them as a shield against yourself, and no human being can carry that weight forever. But when you learn to enjoy your own presence, everything changes. You stop hunting for people to fix your emotions. You stop looking for relationships to rescue you from loneliness. You stop expecting others to make you feel whole. You no longer enter relationships out of desperation, but out of genuine choice. Companionship becomes something you share, not something you cling to. When your inner world becomes stable, you bring a different energy into every interaction. You don't suffocate others with expectations because you don't need them to complete you. You don't panic when they're busy or distant because your well-being doesn't depend on their attention. You don't overreact to small changes because your inner stability doesn't shake every time someone blinks differently. Instead, you become someone others feel safe around, not because you're trying to impress them, but because you're centered, calm, present. You're not draining, you're not demanding. You're not secretly fighting your own emptiness through them. That kind of person naturally attracts healthier relationships. True companionship is not about merging into someone else or losing yourself in their presence. It's two grounded individuals meeting without fear, without desperation, without dependence. You're not trying to fill each other, you're simply walking together. The irony is that people who need companionship the most chase it the hardest, and that very chase pushes others away. Meanwhile, people who feel whole on their own attract companionship effortlessly because others sense their stability. It's not magic, it's psychology, it's energy, it's the natural law of human connection. When you can sit alone without feeling empty, you stop choosing partners out of fear. You begin choosing from clarity. You start recognizing which relationships nourish you and which drain you. You stop tolerating disrespect or inconsistency just to avoid being alone. Solitude teaches you your own worth in a way relationships never could. In Buddhist terms, solitude reveals the nature of your attachments. It shows you how often you've mistaken neediness for love. It reveals the subtle clinging hidden behind your desire to be understood. It shows you how much you depended on others to regulate emotions you never wanted to face. Once you become aware of this, you can enter relationships from a completely different consciousness. You stop looking for someone to save you. You stop expecting someone to heal you. You stop demanding someone to carry your pain. You stop projecting your fears onto them. You stop confusing possession with connection. Instead, you bring presence. You bring honesty. You bring emotional maturity. You bring a version of yourself that isn't controlled by fear, loneliness, or insecurity. When two people meet with this level of inner clarity, companionship becomes easier. There is space instead of pressure. There is understanding instead of clinging. There is freedom instead of attachment. The relationship no longer feels like a battle for emotional security. It becomes a natural expression of two stable minds sharing a path. And here's the paradox: most people never realize. When you don't need companionship, the companionship you get is deeper, healthier, and more genuine. Because it is not built on fear. It is not built on escape. It is not built on the illusion that someone else can complete you. Buddhism teaches that the truest connection you can have with another person begins only after you have formed a solid connection with yourself. Until then, every relationship is just an attempt to run from your own mind. When you learn to love your own company, you become the kind of person who can love others without clinging to them. You value companionship, but you don't rely on it for survival. You appreciate closeness, but you don't fear distance. You offer love, not because you need to be loved back, but because your inner world is already full. True companionship exists only between two whole people, and the path to becoming whole always begins in the same place, sitting with yourself long enough to understand your own mind. Once you can do that, companionship becomes what it was always meant to be, not a crutch, not a cure, but a genuine meeting of two free beings walking side by side. 4. Sitting with yourself without running away. Most people say they want peace, clarity, or inner strength, but the moment they sit alone in silence, they do everything possible to escape it. They reach for their phone. They open a new tab. They message someone. They turn on a video. They create noise without realizing it. This is the mind running away from itself. Buddhism teaches a hard truth many people never confront. Your suffering is not caused by being alone, but by your inability to stay with yourself without fleeing into distraction. You don't fear solitude. You fear the confrontation it forces. When you first sit with yourself, without music, without stimulation, without someone else's presence to lean on, the mind becomes restless. Thoughts start firing, memories show up. Worries come forward. Your breath feels uneven. You feel bored, anxious, or irritated. You start thinking about what you should be doing. You want to get up. You want to check something. You want anything except this moment. This is the threshold where most people quit. They assume the discomfort means something is wrong. They think they're failing. They think solitude is making them miserable. But the truth is brutally simple. The discomfort is not created by solitude. It's created by withdrawal from constant distraction. Your mind has been trained to be overstimulated for years. It has never learned how to rest. So the moment you try to be still, the mind rebels. It wants movement, noise, dopamine, attention, escape. That restlessness is not a sign to run. It's a sign you've finally stopped running. Buddhism calls this stage the confrontation with the monkey mind. The mind jumps, grabs, clings, and panics when you stop feeding it stimulation. The mistake is believing the mind's panic is a warning. It's not. It's a habit of avoiding silence, because silence forces clarity. When you stay with yourself without reacting, something profound begins to happen. You start noticing the patterns you were too distracted to see. You notice how quickly the mind becomes uncomfortable when it doesn't get what it wants. You see how often your thoughts contradict each other. You realize how many worries you carry that aren't even real. You see how much anxiety is just old habits repeating themselves. Sitting with yourself isn't about forcing peace. It's about witnessing the chaos without running, watching the mind like you're watching weather. Clouds appear, storms pass, winds shift, but you remain the observer. Most people don't understand this because they're stuck inside their thoughts, fighting them, believing them, drowning in them. But once you step back and observe the mind, instead of reacting to it, the mind begins to soften. Silence becomes less sharp. Restlessness becomes less urgent. Thoughts lose their grip. Emotions lose their intensity. You no longer feel like you're wrestling with yourself. You feel like you're watching yourself. This shift only happens when you refuse to escape. The moment you sit in solitude long enough for the initial discomfort to pass, you discover something you've been missing your entire life. Your own presence, not performance, not identity, not ego. Just presence, the awareness that watches your thoughts without being trapped by them. This presence is who you actually are beneath habits and noise, and once you find it, solitude becomes easier. It stops feeling like an empty room. It starts feeling like returning home. Buddhism teaches that the mind is like muddy water. If you keep stirring it through noise, people, entertainment, constant stimulation, it stays cloudy. But if you leave it undisturbed, the mud settles and the water becomes clear. Sitting with yourself is how the mud settles. It's how clarity appears. But clarity doesn't show up instantly. The first stage will always feel messy. The mind will throw everything at you: old pain, doubt, fear, guilt, random thoughts, unfinished emotions. That's the detox. That's the mental cleansing. The mistake is assuming the mess means solitude is harming you. In reality, it's healing you by bringing everything buried to the surface. You cannot heal what you refuse to face. Most people never reach the clarity stage because they escape before the mud settles. They choose constant distraction over temporary discomfort. They numb themselves with noise instead of learning to understand their thoughts. They continue running from the very mind that shapes their life. But if you stay, just stay, something begins to change. You notice your breath. You feel your body. You hear the subtle silence beneath the noise. You start recognizing your thoughts as passing events instead of commands. You understand that you don't have to react to every emotion. You learn that restlessness won't kill you. It only scares you because you've never met it before. In that stillness, the mind loosens, the body softens, the fear fades. You begin to feel comfortable in the moment without needing anything to change. This is the foundation of inner strength. When you can sit with yourself without needing distraction, you stop being controlled by your urges, impulses, or fears. You stop depending on external stimulation for peace. You stop needing people to keep you emotionally afloat. You realize that the ability to stay with yourself is one of the rarest forms of mastery in life. People who cannot sit alone make desperate decisions. They chase relationships out of fear. They cling to people who don't care about them. They stay busy to avoid confronting their pain. They enter situations that create suffering just to escape boredom. They confuse distraction with happiness. They mistake stimulation for purpose. But a person who can sit in silence without running is unshakable. They don't chase, they don't cling, they don't crumble when alone, they don't depend on others for emotional survival. They understand themselves, and because of that, they understand life. Buddhism teaches that the greatest companion you can ever have is your own awareness, not because it makes you isolated, but because it frees you from needing constant noise to feel alive. When you learn to sit with yourself, you no longer fear the silence. You begin to appreciate it. You start hearing your own intuition. You start recognizing what you truly want instead of what you've been conditioned to want. You start healing wounds you never had time to acknowledge. You uncover strength you didn't know you had. And the most important transformation of all, being alone no longer feels like being empty. It feels like being grounded, being present, being whole. The world becomes a place you engage with by choice, not desperation. People become companions, not shields. And solitude becomes nourishment instead of punishment. This is why sitting with yourself is the turning point. Run from it, and you stay trapped. Stay with it, and your entire inner world changes. 5. Transforming solitude into strength. Most people experience solitude as a weakness because they've only ever met it in its raw, untrained form. When you're alone without the skills to handle your own mind, solitude feels like pressure, heaviness, boredom, or emotional exposure. But that reaction isn't caused by solitude itself, it's caused by your mind's dependence on external stimulation. The moment you break that dependence, solitude stops being a burden and becomes a source of power. Buddhism makes this point clear. The mind becomes strong only when it is not constantly leaning on the outside world for balance. A mind that depends on noise collapses when the noise disappears. A mind that depends on people falls apart when people leave. A mind that depends on stimulation becomes restless the moment life slows down. But a mind that is trained to sit in silence develops an inner structure that doesn't crumble under pressure. Solitude becomes the training ground for this structure. When you're alone without distractions, the mind is forced to confront itself honestly. You start seeing what thoughts dominate you. You start noticing patterns, what you fear, what you avoid, what you cling to, what you exaggerate. Most people never see these patterns because they stay distracted. But once you sit with yourself long enough, your inner world becomes exposed, and with clarity comes control. You can't strengthen what you refuse to see. This is where solitude begins to turn into strength. It gives you the chance to understand your own mind without distortion. When you're surrounded by people, your attention gets fragmented. You react to their moods, their expectations, their judgments, their energy. You get pulled into their problems or entangled in their emotions. In solitude, none of that is present. You see yourself without interference. You learn how your mind behaves when no one else is influencing it. This pure understanding is the foundation of self-mastery. You also begin to develop mental endurance. When you're alone and you resist the urge to escape into distraction, you build the ability to stay with difficult emotions without collapsing. Instead of panicking at sadness, you observe it. Instead of running from anxiety, you breathe through it. Instead of drowning in overthinking, you watch your thoughts with distance. The moment you stop reacting, the emotions lose power. What felt like a storm becomes a passing cloud. This ability to face emotions directly is one of the strongest forms of resilience a person can develop. Solitude also sharpens your intuition. When the noise of the world falls away, your own inner guidance system becomes clear. You begin to understand what decisions feel right, not because someone told you what to do, but because you've learned to listen to yourself. You see where you've been compromising your values. You see who drains your energy. You see which desires are genuine and which are just cravings disguised as goals. Intuition is a faculty that only develops in quiet, and solitude gives you that quiet. As your inner clarity grows, something powerful happens. You start wanting less from the outside world. You don't chase meaningless relationships. You don't get attached to quick fixes. You don't feel compelled to match society's pace. You stop comparing your life to others. You stop basing your worth on attention or validation. That reduction in craving is what strengthens you. Buddhism teaches that the less you need, the more stable you become. Solitude helps you see how much of your suffering came from unnecessary wanting. Strength also emerges through self-sufficiency. When you learn how to calm your own mind, you no longer rely on people to regulate your emotions. You don't need constant reassurance. You don't depend on external chaos to drown out inner discomfort. You can sit with yourself and generate peace from within. This is not emotional coldness, it's emotional maturity. You become someone who doesn't collapse under pressure because you've learned how to anchor yourself. This self-sufficiency makes you more selective about the people you allow into your life. When you are comfortable alone, you don't tolerate disrespect, manipulation, inconsistency, or shallow connections. You stop accepting crumbs just to feel accompanied. You stop giving access to people who drain you. Solitude shows you your worth by reminding you that you are capable of peace on your own, and once you know that, you refuse to settle for relationships that disrupt that peace. Your decision-making also improves dramatically. Solitude gives you the space to think clearly without being swayed by external opinions. You start recognizing which goals come from your true nature and which come from ego, fear, or societal pressure. You see the difference between what you want for yourself and what you want because it impresses others. Every major turning point in life, from changing careers to ending relationships to starting new paths, requires clarity. And clarity rarely appears in noise. It appears in silence. Buddhism teaches that solitude is not isolation, it's a return to the self. When you use solitude to understand your mind, to process your emotions, to reflect on your actions, you become someone who moves through the world with confidence rather than insecurity. You stop being reactive. You stop being fragile. You stop being easily shaken by changes, opinions, or disappointments. The world becomes easier to navigate because you have already faced the world inside you. As solitude strengthens you, your energy changes. Instead of walking into a room looking for approval, you walk in with calm presence. Instead of needing people to fill your emptiness, you share your fullness with them. Instead of clinging, you connect. Instead of begging for attention, you earn respect through stability. You don't engage in drama. You don't lose yourself in relationships. You don't chase after people who don't want to stay. Your strength comes from the simple truth that you can stand firmly on your own. This is why solitude is one of the most powerful teachers. It shows you the raw truth of who you are. It breaks your dependence on external validation. It exposes your habits, heals your wounds, sharpens your intuition, and builds resilience. It separates genuine desires from delusions. It teaches you to be whole. And from wholeness comes real strength, the kind that doesn't crumble when life becomes difficult. When solitude transforms you, the world no longer intimidates you. People no longer control your peace. Circumstances no longer shake your core. You become stable, calm, and grounded in yourself. You become someone who doesn't run from silence, because silence has become your ally, not your enemy. And the greatest strength you gain is this: you no longer need anyone to complete you, but you can love others more deeply because of it. 6. Letting go of the need for approval. Most people live their lives as if the world is holding a silent scorecard: how they look, what they earn, who they date, how quickly they succeed, how interesting their life appears to others. This obsession with being validated, admired, or understood traps them in a cycle of craving that never ends. Buddhism doesn't sugarcoat this. Your need for approval is one of the strongest chains tying you to suffering, and until you break it, you'll never fully enjoy your own company. The root of approval seeking is simple. You don't trust your own worth. You look to others to confirm it for you. That's why you chase compliments. That's why you panic when someone disapproves. That's why you edit your personality depending on who you're around. That's why you sacrifice your peace just to avoid disappointing people who won't even remember half of what you did. You think you're being kind or cooperative, but in reality, you're afraid. Afraid of being disliked, afraid of being judged, afraid of not being enough. Buddhism teaches that craving leads directly to suffering. Approval is just one more form of craving, the craving to be seen in a certain way. And the moment your identity depends on someone else's reaction, you become a prisoner to their shifting moods. Their praise feeds you, their silence scares you, their criticism destroys you. Their opinion controls your internal world more than your own awareness does. That's not peace. That's slavery disguised as social acceptance. When you fear losing approval, you start living dishonestly. You say yes when you want to say no. You shrink yourself to avoid conflict. You go along with things that don't align with your values. You pretend to be confident when you feel insecure. You pretend to be agreeable when you're overwhelmed. You pretend to be okay when something is silently crushing you. Every time you betray your true feelings to protect an image, you reinforce the belief that your real self is not good enough. This self-rejection is what makes you uncomfortable in your own presence. The reason so many people hate being alone is because they don't like who they are when no one is watching. They've spent so long performing that silence exposes the gap between their true nature and their curated persona. The moment they sit in solitude, the truth emerges. They don't know themselves because they've lived through everyone else's expectations. Letting go of the need for approval requires confronting this truth without running from it. When you sit alone and feel the urge to check what others think, ask yourself why. Why do you need to be liked? Why do you need to constantly monitor other people's reactions? Why does one negative comment have the power to ruin your entire emotional state? Why do you measure your worth through external eyes rather than your own integrity? The honest answer is that you've never learned to validate yourself. You've outsourced your confidence. You've outsourced your identity. You've outsourced your sense of worth. And when your inner world depends on external confirmation, solitude becomes unbearable because no one is there to temporarily patch the insecurity. That's why you feel restless when you're alone. You're waiting for someone to mirror you back to yourself. But Buddhism doesn't encourage you to escape that discomfort. It encourages you to understand it. Approval seeking is a habit built from early conditioning and emotional fear. It's not your identity. The moment you stop feeding it, it weakens. The first step is awareness. You must observe how often you adjust your behavior just to avoid disapproval. Notice how much of your speech is designed to be liked. Notice how much of your energy goes into appearing agreeable. Notice how many decisions are shaped by fear rather than authenticity. Awareness exposes the pattern. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The next step is acceptance. Accept that you won't be everyone's favorite person, and you shouldn't even try. People project their own insecurities, fears, and biases onto you. Their approval has more to do with their own minds than with your worth. Once you understand this, you stop taking reactions personally. You stop chasing admiration from people who don't even know themselves. You stop trying to control how others perceive you. The final step is internal validation, and this is where solitude becomes powerful. When you learn to validate your own thoughts, decisions, and emotions, the need for approval dissolves naturally. You begin to trust yourself. You begin to respect yourself. You begin to stand by your choices without needing applause. This doesn't make you arrogant, it makes you grounded. A person who validates themselves walks differently through the world. They're not shaken by criticism, they're not inflated by praise. They don't lose themselves in relationships. They don't compromise their values for acceptance. They speak honestly without trying to manage everyone else's feelings. They listen without needing to be admired. They exist without needing permission. When you no longer depend on approval, solitude becomes peaceful because you're finally living as yourself, not a performance. You no longer fear silence because you're not waiting for someone to confirm your value. You no longer avoid being alone because you trust your own presence. The pressure lifts. The anxiety fades. The constant self-monitoring stops. The paradox is that once you stop needing approval, the world responds differently. People respect you more when you're not desperate for their validation. They trust you more when you're not trying to play a role. They're drawn to you when you're centered, independent, and genuine. But by then, their approval no longer controls you. It's simply a passing breeze, not a life source. Buddhism teaches that true freedom comes when craving ends. Letting go of the need for approval is one of the deepest forms of liberation. For the first time in your life, you're no longer performing for the world, you're living from within. And once you anchor your worth in your own awareness, you stop chasing people to feel enough. You stop fearing judgment. You stop pretending. You become someone who can walk through life without bending, without begging, without hiding, and without needing anyone to carry your sense of worth. When you reach that point, loving your own company becomes effortless. You're not avoiding the world, you're simply no longer owned by it. 7. Becoming whole within yourself. Most people spend their lives searching for wholeness in places it can never be found. Relationships, achievements, money, attention, status, admiration. The world teaches you that you must earn your worth through accomplishment or receive it through other people's approval. Buddhism exposes this illusion with one of its deepest truths. You are already whole, but your mind has forgotten how to recognize itself. When you don't understand your own mind, you move through life feeling incomplete. You cling to people because you think they'll fill your emptiness. You chase experiences to numb the discomfort inside you. You create identities strong, attractive, successful, helpful, hoping they compensate for the parts of you you've ignored. But anything built on avoidance collapses the moment life becomes quiet. Wholeness doesn't come from adding more to your life. It comes from removing the misunderstandings that keep you disconnected from yourself. The first misunderstanding is the belief that something outside you will complete you. This belief is responsible for most of your suffering. It makes you depend on others for confidence, happiness, and emotional safety. It makes you fear loss. It makes you cling to relationships that drain you. It makes you settle for situations that don't align with your values. It makes you feel unstable whenever life shifts even slightly. As long as you look outside yourself for completion, you will always remain fragile. The second misunderstanding is the belief that your thoughts define you. You think you are, your fear, your insecurity, your anxiety, your past mistakes, your regrets, and your old wounds. But these are temporary states of the mind, not your identity. The moment you sit with yourself in silence long enough, you begin to see that thoughts rise and fall like waves. They come, they go, they intensify, they fade. But the awareness that observes them, the part of you that sees the thoughts without being controlled by them, is constant. That awareness is your wholeness. The third misunderstanding is believing that your value depends on how others see you. You feel whole when someone loves you and empty when someone leaves. You feel confident when someone praises you and worthless when someone criticizes you. You feel alive when surrounded by people and lost when alone. This means your identity is built on unstable external forces. Buddhism teaches that anything dependent on others is impermanent, and anything impermanent cannot be the source of true wholeness. Wholeness begins the moment you recognize that your awareness, the part of you that can observe your entire inner world without being shaken by it, is the only stable foundation you have. When you sit alone in silence, without distractions, without validation, without entertainment, you meet this awareness directly. At first, the mind resists. It brings up restlessness, boredom, fear, self-doubt. But when you watch these reactions without feeding them, something shifts. You begin to see that the part of you noticing these thoughts is untouched by them. Your awareness is deeper than your insecurities, deeper than your cravings, deeper than your past, deeper than your fears. This discovery is the beginning of wholeness. The more time you spend with yourself consciously, the more you uncover layers you didn't know existed. You begin to notice how much of your behavior was shaped by fear rather than intention. You start seeing how often you betrayed your own needs just to avoid conflict or disappointment. You recognize how much energy you wasted trying to control the uncontrollable. You realize how often you confused attachment with love and distraction with happiness. Solitude gives you the space to repair this relationship with yourself. When you stop running from your mind, you begin understanding it. You see which emotions are genuine and which are reactions to old wounds. You see which desires come from your true self and which come from conditioning or insecurity. You see what brings you peace and what creates inner conflict. You see what you've been holding on to that never belonged to you. This clarity dissolves the illusions that keep you feeling incomplete. Wholeness grows through honesty, not the polished honesty you show others, but the raw honesty you show yourself when no one is watching. When you admit what hurts, when you acknowledge what you fear, when you confront the parts of your life you've been avoiding, when you let go of excuses, when you stop blaming the world and start taking responsibility for your inner state. This self-honesty is not punishment, it is liberation. It allows you to rebuild yourself on truth rather than pretense. As you become more honest with yourself, you begin treating yourself differently. You stop abandoning yourself in moments of discomfort. You stop chasing people who don't value you. You stop tolerating relationships that thrive on disrespect or manipulation. You stop forcing yourself into roles that suffocate your authenticity. You stop measuring your life by external milestones. You stop letting the world dictate your worth. You learn to choose peace, even when it means walking alone. Wholeness doesn't mean perfection. It means self-connection. It means you know how to return to yourself no matter what happens. It means you can feel sadness without collapsing. It means you can feel lonely without believing you're incomplete. It means you can sit in silence without fearing the truth that rises. It means you no longer need the world to make you feel like you exist. You exist fully in your own presence. A person who is whole moves through life differently. They are not desperate. They are not reactive. They are not controlled by insecurity. They don't cling to people. They don't hide behind distractions. They don't lose themselves in relationships. They don't fear being alone. They don't crumble when faced with uncertainty. Their peace comes from within, so external chaos cannot steal it. This kind of wholeness radiates. People feel it. They sense your stability. They sense your clarity. They sense your groundedness. You become someone who does not demand love, but naturally receives it because your presence is calm, centered, and honest. But here's the greatest transformation. Once you become whole within yourself, the idea of needing someone to complete you becomes meaningless. You don't seek relationships to escape loneliness. You seek them to share your fullness. You don't chase people to fill a gap. You connect because you genuinely want to, not because you're afraid of the silence. Buddhism teaches that true freedom and true peace begin when the mind no longer looks outward for completion. When you return to yourself, understand your own mind, and rest in your own awareness, you stop living as a fragmented person searching for missing pieces. You become whole. And from that wholeness, every part of life becomes lighter. Relationships become healthier. Choices become clearer. Emotions become manageable. Solitude becomes nourishing. And your own company becomes a place of comfort rather than fear. This is the essence of loving your own company, not becoming isolated from the world, but becoming deeply connected to yourself. Once that connection is formed, you no longer need anyone to complete you, but you can share your life with others from a place of strength, not emptiness. You've spent most of your life trying to escape yourself, running into noise, into people, into distractions, hoping something out there would silence the discomfort inside you. But Buddhism makes one truth impossible to avoid. Nothing outside you can give you the peace you refuse to build within yourself. Solitude isn't the enemy. Your misunderstanding of your own mind is. When you finally stop running and choose to sit with yourself, the illusions begin to fall apart. The loneliness you feared reveals itself as unexamined emotion. The emptiness you felt becomes space. The silence you resisted becomes clarity. And the self you avoided becomes the foundation you never realized you needed. Wholeness doesn't come from adding more to your life. It comes from meeting yourself fully. When you understand your mind, you stop depending on others for your sense of worth. When you learn to rest in your own presence, you stop fearing solitude. And when you become whole within yourself, you stop needing anyone to complete you, yet you can love more honestly because of it. Peace is not found in the world. It is found in the person who can sit with their own mind without running away. If you can master that, you'll never fear being alone again. You'll finally understand that your own company was never the problem, it was the path.